Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Urology Speaks, presented by the Brady Urological Institute at Johns Hopkins. My name is Mohamad Allaf, and I'm the Jakursky Family Director of the Brady Urological Institute and Urologist in Chief at Johns Hopkins Hospital. The topic of today's session is hereditary prostate cancer, and we're so fortunate to have with us today the former director of the Brady and urology legend, Dr. Patrick Walsh. Like many of you, I celebrated Father's Day this last weekend, and it seems like a very appropriate time to raise awareness regarding the heritability of the second most common type of cancer among men, prostate cancer. Sadly, hair color and build are not the only things that you can inherit from your parents. In the last couple of decades, we've come to learn more about how genetics and family history play a role in a patient's likelihood of developing prostate cancer, and much of this knowledge has come out of the Brady Urological Institute. In the late 1980s, one of Dr. Walsh's patients asked the question, is prostate cancer hereditary? And believe it or not, at the time, no one knew the answer. But thanks to the dedicated work of Dr. Walsh and our team of researchers and colleagues from around the world, we know now that the answer is a profound yes. Today, Dr. Walsh will share the history of the discovery of hereditary prostate cancer and his team's success in identifying some of the genes responsible for the disease. He will be joined by a longtime Brady patient and friend, Mr. Clay King, who will share his family pedigree and a little about his personal experience. After that conversation, I will provide a brief update on some of our latest research and plans for the future. A few housekeeping remarks before we start the program. If you have questions during our presentation, please submit them via the Q&A button found at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Dr. Walsh and I will address as many questions as time allows towards the end of the session. Today's session will be recorded and posted on our website, along with other recordings of our previous sessions, so please check those out and share them. We have a great presentation for you today, so without further delay, it's my honor to introduce to you Dr. Patrick Walsh. Dr. Walsh is the University Distinguished Service Professor of Urology and is recognized internationally as a pioneer in the diagnosis and treatment of prostate cancer. He is best known for his monumental contribution to both patient care and urologic surgery, the development of the nerve-sparing radical prostatectomy, a technique that protects a man's quality of life after surgery for prostate cancer. Dr. Walsh joined the faculty as director of the Brady Urological Institute in the year that I was born, 1974, and held the position for 30 years. His scholarly contributions are immense and, frankly, too many to recite in our short time together. Dr. Walsh has been a personal and professional mentor to me during my entire career, and I'm truly honored to continue working with him. Without further ado, Dr. Walsh, the screen is all yours.
Thank you very much, Mo. Let me get my slides up here. Why are many of you interested in hereditary prostate cancer, and why is it important? It's important because, as you would imagine, and you all believe, is that if we understood what the genes were that caused it, we would be able to identify men and their families who were at high risk for developing the disease. And as you'll learn in this talk, for some genetic mutations, some other cancers as well, so that they can begin testing at an earlier age. Secondly, and this is an area that I think is understated, it's important to understand the genetic pathways that cause prostate cancer. And we hope that this may lead to new approaches for treatment and ultimately prevention of the disease. Some basic facts. Prostate cancer is more hereditary than any other cancer. If a man's father or brother had it, his increased risk of developing it is greater than his wife's increased risk of breast cancer if her mother or sister had it. Secondly, a man can inherit it from his mother or father. Oh, yes, a woman can also inherit breast cancer from either parent. So when thinking about your family history, for a man, you not only think about your father and his brothers, but your mother's father and her brothers. The average age for developing prostate cancer is 68, but men with hereditary disease develop it at a younger age. So let me present the case to you. So today's patient, Clay, presented at age 55 with a strong family history of the disease. So he's going to tell us more about that. But let me just explain what a genetic pedigree looks like. So on a pedigree, a square is a man, a circle is a woman. If the square is filled in, the man had the disease, and if there's a line through it, he died from it. So here we see our patient today. Clay is going to tell us more about himself. Okay, Clay, thank you very much for joining us.
It's an honor to be with you.
So I wonder if you could tell us what it was like when you first realized that you had an increased risk because of your family history.
Well, I first realized I had an increased risk because of my family history. I was very concerned. My grandfather, George King, was diagnosed with prostate cancer in his mid-60s, and he went to Duke Medical Center for treatment. He died of prostate cancer at the age of 71 in the year of 1972. My father, Louis King, was diagnosed with prostate cancer at the age of 62. And he received treatment here in Fort Lauderdale, where we live. Although a close friend of his had just gone to Dr. Walsh the year before and highly recommended Dr. Walsh to him, but he didn't take his advice. But at the time he was diagnosed, his PSA was a 7. Now, he had been keeping track of his PSA over the years, but for some reason in the past 3 years, he had not. And by the time he was diagnosed, his PSA was a 7. And he lived to when he was the age of 72. And he died in 1999 of prostate cancer.
Why did you begin PSA testing so early?
Well, as I mentioned, my father and grandfather, but when I was in my late 30s, back in the early 1990s, I remember reading some articles that there may be a link between prostate cancer and family history. So I had my PSA and my my rectal exam done every year since then. And I kept the result on a chart, and it started at about 0.5. And then every year it kind of ticked up. Some years it stayed the same, but it never went down. So it kind of went up and up and up. And by the time I was 54, it had gone up to 1.8. I was referred to a local urologist. He said, let's watch it for a while longer. 6 months later, I had my PSA checked, and it went from 1.8 to 2.3. And then another 6 months later, it went to 3.5. And that was the time, of course, he wanted to do a biopsy. He did the biopsy, and my Gleason came back as a 7, which is a 3 plus 4. For those of you who know about Gleason scores, that's better than a 4 plus 3, so that was good. So I made an appointment with Dr. Walsh, and he was kind enough to fit me into his schedule. 2 months later, and I had my prostate removed, and I've had an excellent result in all respects, and I'm now 69 years old.
So let's go back over that family history. How many members of your family had been diagnosed at the time, had been diagnosed at the time you were diagnosed, and then how many subsequently afterwards have been?
Well, I mentioned my grandfather, George King, my father, Louis King. My father's brother, Joe King, was diagnosed with prostate cancer at the age of 60, and he had his prostate removed where he lived in North Carolina, and he's been prostate cancer free since then, and he's in his mid-80s. But after my diagnosis, my cousin Walter King, who's also Joe King's son, was diagnosed with prostate cancer at the age of 43. They had been watching his prostate PSA and let it get up above 4. And they had the prostate removed, but it already escaped the prostate, and he underwent radiation and hormone therapy. So those are all the people that have been diagnosed that are on my family tree. And his PSA, Walter's PSA, has been undetectable since, but that's been like maybe 5 years.
So was there anyone on your mother's side that had prostate cancer?
As far as I know, my mother had a sister. Her father passed away in his mid-80s, and there's no history of prostate cancer on her side. However, I do want to bring up my wife's family because her great-grandfather died of prostate cancer, and her father was diagnosed with prostate cancer at the age of 72, which was controlled by seed implants. And my wife's brother, one of my wife's brothers, was also diagnosed with prostate cancer at age 52, and he had his prostate removed and is now cancer-free.
Based on your experience, what advice would you like to give the next generation?
Well, the reason I brought up my wife's side of the family, and the history of my family is that we have a 33-year-old son who has a family history of prostate cancer on wife and mother and father. So is my advice to him and the future generations of family members that are affected by prostate cancer is to get their PSA and their exams done at least annually as early as possible. Now for him, I had bugged him and he started doing it at age 30. He's had 3 of them and it's low. But if he keeps it on a chart like mine and realizes when it accelerates, that kind of is in my opinion, I'm not a doctor, but the time maybe to consider a biopsy.
Thank you very much. So Dr. Allaf mentioned the discovery of hereditary prostate cancer and how I became interested. And I'm going to retell that story for a special purpose. So again, in the late 1980s, I saw a 49-year-old man with prostate cancer who asked me an important question that I could not answer. He asked me, was prostate cancer hereditary? When I asked why he wanted to know, he said, because my father's 3 brothers, and my grandfather all died from prostate cancer. At that time, every woman knew that if her sister, or if her mother or sister had breast cancer, her risk was 2-fold increased. But I had no idea about the risk for men with a family history of prostate cancer. And I had 2 maternal uncles who died from it. So here was an important discovery. And when I mentioned this idea to others, they said, well, how can it be hereditary if every man develops it? So no one seems to recognize this as an important problem, and no one seemed to be working on it. So for all of you, how do you make discoveries? Well, I teach my residents that you listen to your patients. And this particular patient, it was pretty clear to me that in at least one family, his family, there had to be a genetic cause. So we decided we would study it. First, I went to the literature and I found 3 articles. The first one back in the 60s, one in the 70s, and one in the 80s all from the Mormon Genealogical Registry, reporting various aspects of the potential hereditary component. And when I first read those articles, I thought, well, maybe there was a sort of an inbred tendency from the Utah Mormon population. But to determine whether or not this happened in other populations, we studied it. We did what was called a case control study, comparing the family history of prostate cancer in 700 men who I had operated on to the family history in their spouses. And what we found was if there was one first-degree relative, the relative risk was 2.2. And if there were two or more, the relative risk was as high as 4.9. Soon after we published that, along came other authors who found very similar findings. The next thing we did is that if something runs in families, it could be environmental. I mean, let's face it, families that lived on Love Canal as an exaggerated concept, or it can be genetic. And so to distinguish between genetic and environmental factors, we carried out what's called a segregation analysis and published it in 1992 in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. And this segregation analysis established for the first time the genetic basis for prostate cancer and actually gave us a working definition. So, you know, if you want to study a disease, it has to be well defined. So, definition of hereditary prostate cancer. If you see an individual in a family where the father, son, and brother had it, 3 first-degree relatives, or 3 generations, a grandfather, father, and son, or 2 first-degree relatives, if both were younger than age 55. So in this study, we showed the characteristics of hereditary disease were multiple affected members and early age at onset. So let me illustrate this. So patient says, prostate cancer runs in my family. What is my risk of developing the disease? So again, it's the number of affected members and their age at diagnosis. So let's pretend a man says, well, my father had it at age 70. And we'll put his relative risk at 1, but it's actually 2 from what I just told you. So if you take that, another person with a similar history, but he says that now my brother has it, okay, 2 first-degree relatives, that his relative risk goes up 4-fold. How do you find the genes? It's not called linkage analysis. Now, in 1988, Dr. William Isaacs joined the Brady Research faculty. And for the first 4 years he was there, he worked on the genes within the tumor itself called somatic mutations. And subsequently, he then joined in this and led this linkage analysis. So what is a linkage analysis? Well, you start out with multiple families that have multiple generations with the disease. And then you take markers on every chromosome where you know their location. And you see, for example, if that marker matches up in each one of these members. And if so, that tells you that there is a locus here on this chromosome that may be causing the cancer. You then sequence it, and then you look for candidate genes. Well, Bill worked on that very hard, and he actually ran an international consortium that looked at it. And indeed, there was linkage at a number of sites. However, few of these observations could be consistently identified by multiple investigators. And secondly, none of them fulfilled the criteria for a high penetrance mutation like the breast cancer genes. So let me explain our frustration. At the beginning of the talk, I told you that prostate cancer was more heritable than any other common cancer. And that observation came from a study of twins in the Nordic countries. So here you can see the calculated heritability for prostate cancer is 57%, ovary 39%, kidney 38%, breast cancer 31%, colon cancer 15%. But what about known mutations? So at a time that we could not find any, and I mean the world scientists, there were known mutations for all of these other cancers. But despite strong evidence for an hereditary component for prostate cancer, identification of the genes was elusive. So where is the missing heritability? Well, as opposed to breast cancer, where there are two major genes, we reasoned, and we still believe, that there may be many pathways, like the multiple roads to Rome. How do you find these mutations? Well, to find them, it is like trying to find one misspelled word in 20 sets of the Encyclopedia Britannica. That's right, in 400 separate volumes. However, with the development of next generation sequencing called high throughput sequencing, this became possible. And we were able to use that and publish this article in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2012. We met up with the University of Michigan and found these 4 families where 18 of the 18 men with prostate cancer and available DNA had exactly the same mutation in the gene HOXB13. 4 years later, investigators at Stand Up to Cancer Research Group carried out a very important study. They looked at men with castration-resistant disease. These were men who were dying from prostate cancer, and they looked to see if they carried any mutations in their germline. And they found that 6% of these men had mutations in the BRCA2 gene, the breast cancer gene, and that's called a DNA repair gene. And when they looked at other DNA repair genes like ATM and mismatch repair genes in the Lynch syndrome, they found that in men with castration-resistant prostate cancer had inherited mutations that rose to over 12%. And then we carried out this study at Hopkins, looking at men who died at a young age, under the age of 65, and confirmed also that 10 to 12% carried germline mutations in the breast cancer genes and in ATM. So this is where we stand today on the 4 most common genes responsible for prostate cancer. HOXB13, you can see, is the only one that's prostate specific. Here's BRCA2, which can be responsible for breast cancer in women and men, ovarian cancer and pancreas cancer, CHEK2, and ATM. So that's why I said at the beginning of my talk, when we see a man that appears to have hereditary prostate cancer, we do sequencing of all these genes because, again, they may cause this. And secondly, in taking the family history, we not only ask about the number of patients with prostate cancer, but we also ask about a family history of breast cancer, ovarian cancer, pancreas cancer, leukemia, and lymphoma. However, this still only explains a small percent of the missing heritability. The perfect gift. So in February 2018, when I turned 80, the Brady Institute's Director of Development asked, if a patient would ask you what you'd like for your birthday, what would you say? Well, it's possible to sequence every exon in a patient's genome for a reasonable price. I said enough money to perform whole exome sequencing in our hereditary cases to uncover the missing heritability of prostate cancer. Well, this delay actually turned out to be helpful by permitting us to develop one of the largest collections of hereditary prostate families in the world, more than 3,000 families and more than 8,000 individual DNA samples on hereditary prostate cancer families. Well, that message was shared, and our patients responded with an amazing $3 million in gifts to establish and support the Patrick C. Walsh Hereditary Prostate Cancer Program. So where are we today? Discovery and characterization of genes responsible for hereditary prostate cancer. As a result of the immense generosity of our patients and friends, we have uncovered a trove of genetic variants that hold great promise for our understanding of hereditary prostate cancer. We now know we are going in the right direction because so far we have found 50 to 60 variants that had not been previously identified as cancer-causing genes. And now we have the job of functionally characterizing them to make certain that they cause cancer and to define their mode of action. So Dr. Isaacs has put together an ambitious plan and recruited an outstanding group of investigators to carry it out. This ambitious plan also came with an ambitious budget, the gift that continues to give. In the fall of 2020, one of my long-term patients, Ross Myers, heard about our effort. He and his wife wanted to help. During our conversation, he became animated and expressed a concern that many of you may also feel. If this will help prevent my sons and grandsons from walking in my shoes, I will help. So he originally pledged $1 million, but upon further reflection, offered, I'll give you $2 million if you can match it. What an inspirational gesture. And thanks to his gift and the generosity of others, we have been able to move forward. So now let's go back and let me speak to Clay for a moment here and ask him some more questions. Well, Clay, we are really grateful for your partnership and your shared belief in this work. What inspired you to become a philanthropic partner in our research?
Well, as I mentioned, I saw the suffering of my grandfather and my father over a 6 to 7 year period, die of prostate cancer. And knowing that it is likely connected to family history, if, it was for me a joy to my heart to participate in your study, Dr. Walsh, and knowing too that you, having taken out my prostate, have given me a new lease on life and many others. So thank you so much for your intense dedication. I know that you're just on the cusp of finding so many other genes that are out there. And I just admire you, just so you know, for being a world leader in solving the links between prostate cancer and family history.
Well, I'm really lucky to be at Johns Hopkins, where we have so many others dedicated. I understand I'm a spokesman. I've been called the brand, but honestly, so many people who have worked on this. So as a longtime supporter, you've watched our progress for many years. What are your hopes for the work moving forward? Advances that you'd like to witness?
Well, someday I'd like to witness, God willing, many more genes being associated with prostate cancer and therapies that can help suppress those genes, and other therapies that can be used to eliminate prostate cancer from many families who suffer greatly from this disease, including our own family. So again, Patrick, you're an inspiration to me. It's been a joy to participate. You're dear to my heart. And not only for your ministry in this area of prostate cancer, but Dr. Walsh is involved in a prison ministry, which I admire him for. And it's been an honor to support your efforts and be a part of this panel and to see the miracles that you are wrought, you are bringing into the world today through this study.
Thank you so much for participating. So Mo, I think you take off at this point, right?
Yes, Dr. Walsh, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation and the work, sort of inspiration, and thanks to Mr. King for participating with us today and for your long-term engagement and friendship. Dr. Walsh had mentioned that it takes a team really to do this work, and without a team leader, Dr. Walsh being one of them, and Dr. Billy Isaacs, who really I want to take some time to salute for being really the lead on many of these studies that have made these discoveries and continue this work forward. And every Batman has to have a Robin. And if there is a Robin here, it's Dr. Jun Liu, who's one of our top researchers. Dr. Jun Liu recently became the Alan W. Parton Professor of Urology, which is a very special honor. Dr. Isaacs is planning to retire, and we've kind of been playing around with the dates because he's so committed to making sure that the work will continue and that this story has an ending that is sort of full of the fruits of his labor. And so the plan is for Dr. Isaacs to step down, hopefully a year from now. And at that time, we will celebrate his tenure. And at that time, we should have a lot more of these families sequences done. And at the time, Dr. Jun Liu will take over the Hereditary Prostate program. And I know that under his tenure and leadership, we will continue this important work. So we're at the 5-year anniversary of the Patrick C. Walsh Hereditary Cancer Program, but we plan to continue this until we have the answers. Looking ahead, next steps in hereditary prostate cancer research is to continue following promising lines of inquiry, and there are a lot of them, and many of the things that have been said today in terms of figuring out prevention of hereditary prostate cancer, early diagnosis of hereditary prostate cancer, the treatment, is there any unique treatment options that are less invasive that one can work with, and treatments in late stage disease and advanced cancer. Looking at some of the known mutations like HOXB13 and variants within them, identification of other susceptibility genes. There's this concept of single nucleotide polymorphisms. That is when one of the DNA base pairs is changed, and they're very subtle to sort of finding patterns of them seems to be related to heritability of prostate cancer. Things called GRS or the genomic risk score, for example, is something that's born out of this idea of small changes in the DNA across the entire DNA, and we're getting better analytic tools to be able to do it as our quantitative methods get better. And of course, because science is a team sport, if you will, making sure that these large data sets are on a platform where we could share data with collaborators and people around the world to be able to contribute to further discoveries is particularly important. How do we translate scientific knowledge to clinical practice is an important question. To create patient-centered, what we call precision medicine plans based on genetic knowledge. When do you start PSA testing in someone with a specific gene, or when do you do it for people with a family history but no known gene that we've discovered yet? Who needs genetic testing, and if so, which genetic test should someone get? Better diagnostic tools. These are biomarkers that the Brady has been famous in looking at, and we could answer a lot of these questions with the biological specimens and the follow-up that we've had, and Dr. Walsh has had the foresight to help us collect. And we have some special programs in the Brady where we can implement some of these initiatives to help some of our patients. We have a program in the active surveillance of prostate cancer, and a lot of what we learn in genetics can apply. For example, can we learn who gets prostate cancer, and are there genetic changes that may indicate that this patient is going to die with the disease rather than of the disease, and how can we integrate that knowledge in following men with prostate cancer that don't need immediate treatment. We have a program called the Schoffeld Program for prostate cancer in Black men. The story goes that Black men have a higher risk of having prostate cancer, and when they do get prostate cancer, the outcomes tend to be worse than their counterparts. And does genetics, genomics have a part to play there? And how can we understand the genetic underpinnings and in turn be able to help in those specific situations through these unique programs? It's also no secret that with this work, we generate a lot of data. Dr. Walsh gave us the analogy of the Encyclopedia Britannica, but really it's maybe more volumes than what Dr. Walsh had in his slide set. As we start to get 8,000 individual DNA samples that are sequenced, these sequences are a collection of letters, these base pairs that can span reams and reams of paper if you were to print them out. There are 20,000 biological specimens collected from patients with prostate cancer in our biorepository. So these are blood, urine, hair follicles, saliva that we've banked, understanding who those patients are, their family histories. And how do you leverage this big data? Companies have done a great job leveraging it in business to help predict who their customers are, or who to target via social media. We need to do that work in medicine by leveraging the quantitative sciences and being able to, number one, build a data platform where all of this data resides in an easy to access a way that is agnostic to the method of analysis. So anybody can really reach in, grab the data that they need to do the analysis, and then through advanced computational methods, computational biology, using artificial intelligence and machine learning to be able to help us understand the data better, form predictive tools, and then allow for cross-departmental, cross-institutional, international collaborations to be able to harness this data in a very meaningful way. So those are, big concepts. We're currently recruiting a director of quantitative sciences. The idea is to start a big effort at the Brady in this area of data science and computational biology, because we truly believe that that is the science that will solve a lot of these puzzles that remain in the area of prostate cancer. Of course, I have to thank Dr. Walsh. I don't think it was coincidental that Dr. Walsh took over the Brady Urological Institute in 1974. I said that was the year that I was born. Father's Day was just a week ago, and we're talking about hereditary prostate cancer. And I have to say that Dr. Walsh is a father to me in many ways, but he's also potentially a father to many who he's taught, a lot of men who he has treated, 4,569 prostatectomies. The story, the picture I show here is that last case that Dr. Walsh performed, this 4,569th case, and I had the distinct pleasure and honor of assisting him in that case. And I show this picture prominently in my office, and Dr. Walsh came in the other day and saw it, and we reminisced about that special day, and I thought I would include it in this presentation. So I do want to thank Dr. Walsh for everything, but primarily for the foresight he's had to start these scientific efforts. And on behalf of generations of grateful patients and their loved ones, thank you, Dr. Walsh, for that, and thank you for today. I want to remind those who have joined us sort of late is that this program is being recorded and it will be available online along with previous episodes or occurrences of Urology Speaks. So please, if you missed the beginning, you can check it out there. We will be doing questions and answers. And so if those come up, please press the tab at the bottom that says Q&A, and you can enter them. And we've already received a few very interesting questions. So with that, perhaps we'll spend a few minutes answering some of these questions. So Dr. Walsh, a question came up that says, my father and brother both had prostate cancer. I had it too and was treated successfully by Dr. Allaf. Thank you. You're very welcome. And it's so nice to see you do well and be on this program with us. After this, I got a genetic test to see if my son was at risk, and the genetic test came back completely clear. Does this mean I did not inherit cancer from my father? Does it mean my son will not inherit it from me? And when, I will add this question, and when should my son be tested for prostate cancer? When should they get their first PSA?
This is a very common problem. And I think in my talk, I pointed out that right now we actually only know of 4 genes, and only about 2% of people across the board who are tested will turn out to have one of them. And this is the missing heritability. So first of all, we would be very interested in entering you, this individual, into our study with the 8,000 DNA samples, the 3,000 families. And I want to emphasize that once someone enters our study, they are de-identified. So, we don't know any names. And so, like Dr. Allaf talked about sharing this, with people elsewhere, no one knows who you are. So there's no way that anyone can find out who you are. And we would love to put you in our study, because we are going to continue this. And out of these 50 or 60 potential genes that we've identified, we believe that there will be multiple families that inherit one of them. But right now, the best thing you can do is to make certain that your son begins testing at age 40. And his PSA should be less than 1.0, ideally less than 0.6. But let's take 1.0 as an easy number. So if it's less than 1, he should have his next PSA when he's 45 and then when he's 50. If it's 1 or greater, he should start having it every year.
Thank you, Dr. Walsh. Another question comes up is, and a few people asked, and I'll paraphrase the questions, that it seems like there are forms of prostate cancer that may be hereditary. Can you tell us about the aggressiveness of the prostate cancer? Are hereditary cancers more aggressive, and what do we know about that?
Okay, so what is hereditary prostate cancer? All cancers are genetic. They're caused by damage to DNA. And it takes a sequence of DNA damages, chromosomes to be damaged, genes to be damaged, to cause a cancer. So for prostate cancer, Bert Vogelstein says that the number of genetic changes is equal to the number of decades, the average age of it. So there's 6 or 7 genes. So if you have an hereditary form of the disease, you have actually inherited one of those genes in every cell in your body. And that is why you're not only more likely to get it, but to get it at a younger age. However, because we believe that these changes that you inherit are the same genes that become mutated spontaneously, there is no good evidence that hereditary prostate cancer is more aggressive. Now, I'm going to modify that in 2 ways. Well, my grandfather died from it. Well, probably your grandfather wasn't diagnosed. He got it in his 40s. He didn't know it till he was 70, and his disease was advanced for that reason. So today, finding it in younger men, they're more curable. Secondly, there are some forms of hereditary prostate cancer that are more aggressive, and they're the ones that are caused by this DNA damage. So for example, the BRCA2 mutation, CHEK2, for example, those produce a more aggressive form of cancer, but they are exceedingly rare.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Walsh. And I think, a point to make is that these known genes like BRCA, CHEK2, ATM, if you looked at their prevalence, they're very low in prevalence. So a few people will have them, but if they have them, they portend a very high risk of getting prostate cancer. And most of those, the BRCAs will actually have a more aggressive form of prostate cancer. But the average hereditary prostate cancer is not related to the aggressiveness in some ways. A question came up, Dr. Walsh, about a lot of questions have come up about breast cancer. The issue of, you did touch on if a woman has breast cancer and her sister has breast cancer, is the son at an increased risk of prostate cancer? Similarly, a father and a brother and a grandfather have prostate cancer. What can you tell us about cancers in women and sort of that interplay from a genetic standpoint?
Well, what we do know, obviously, as I've already said, if it's an hereditary form like BRCA1 or BRCA2, and there's breast cancer on one side, yes, the men that if they inherit that gene are more likely to get prostate cancer and pancreatic cancer. I'm not sure, I've never really read about the opposite direction, and that is there any increase in breast cancer in men with a family history of prostate cancer? But you could see that obviously, if those men carry the BRCA2 gene, it would happen. So I think that the possibility is very rare. The one way to investigate it is, I think, anyone with multiple family members should have genetic testing.
Great. A question comes up about age, and I'll sort of paraphrase the question here. I've heard that all men will eventually develop prostate cancer as they age. Is that true? And if so, is there a specific age cutoff of diagnosis that marks a higher risk of hereditary disease? And if it is true, how do you specifically differentiate hereditary risk? Is there an age cutoff for this?
So let me talk about that number. So people say if you live long enough, everyone will get it. Well, that is wrong. But if an 80-year-old man with no history of it gets hit by a car, he has a 50% chance. So 50% of men, 1 out of 2 men, when they die, will have a few cancer cells in their prostate. Now, let me talk about age and prostate cancer. We used to believe that when young men got it, they were more likely to die from it, and older men got it. It didn't matter. That is absolutely backwards. The reason young men had more aggressive disease is no one ever tried to look for it. And so younger men are more curable. As men get older, if they get prostate cancer, it is more aggressive. Half of the men who die from prostate cancer have been diagnosed after the age of 75. So for men who are 75 and healthy, if their PSA is greater than 3.0, they need to continue PSA testing. So what about hereditary disease? Although we say it occurs in younger men, the problem is it's a spectrum. It doesn't just occur in younger men, and those people need to be followed. And interestingly, the prostate cancers that occur in the BRCA1, BRCA2 patients are actually older. So, the women who carry that gene may get breast cancer at a young age, but the men that carry it do get prostate cancer in their 60s and 70s. So there's no time when, if you carry one of those, that you can stop testing.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated by that statistic that 50% of men who die of prostate cancer are diagnosed after the age of 75. And if you were to dabble in the lay press and listen to some folks, there is a push to sort of stop thinking about prostate cancer after age 70. Now, 2 things are happening. One is men who are 70 are living longer and longer, and are healthier and healthier. So that's important to take into account. And then B is that older men get prostate cancer. When they get it, it's aggressive. So I think that they have to be vigilant and discuss their individual risk with their doctor. So thank you, Dr. Walsh.
So we used to believe that when older men got prostate cancer, it was less aggressive, and that's wrong. And the reason is that in 1975, the average age at death for a man was 68. Today, it's 78 because of reduction in death from cardiovascular disease. So and the average age of death from prostate cancer is 80. So back in 1975, when people formulated these ideas, men did not live long enough to die from it. Now that men are living longer, as you said, for healthy men that have longevity, they still have to worry about it.
Yeah, very, very important. And, honestly, even sometimes our residents need to be reminded of this. A good question about what role will artificial intelligence play in the identification and classification of prostate cancers? And in this question, they ask about PSMA PET scans or other scans, and will it replace traditional methods of reading scans? And if I may, Dr. Walsh, I can pontificate a little bit about this because it is a red hot topic, I think, in our area. In particular, the idea of looking at large data sets, so MRIs, PSMA PET scans, but even our biopsy slides. When you get a biopsy and you put it on a slide and you look at it, we still do the Gleason grading system, which is actually looking at that piece of tissue under low power, and a skilled pathologist looks at it and says it looks like cancer and it's a grade 3 or a grade 4 or what have you. There's no doubt that there will be a role for a computer to look at this information in a digitized format and be able to predict aggressiveness of disease, need for treatment, outcomes, etc. There are multiple efforts ongoing to uncover sort of those types of avenues of things, but currently none of them are ready for prime time. But I do believe that we will, in the next few years, start to see tools that are going to perform better than a human being looking at a large data set and making a determination. The manual that we use to understand how to read an MRI of the prostate is over 50 pages long. So if something is that complex to understand and then look at a scan to decipher it, there definitely will be a role, I think, for a computer to look at that.
Well, you've been praising me, but I want to praise you. So you saw on his plan that he is going to put together a unit here in artificial intelligence. And our field is perfect for it. For example, I'm actually looking, there is the encyclopedia
behind you.
behind me, but the point is that, all of the genes that we are looking at and things like that can be interrogated much more accurately with high-powered computational methods. And that is a program that you are putting in place and are going to hire someone for it. So I think that's going to pay off big with big dividends.
I agree, Dr. Walsh. I believe in that.
And the PSMA scans have been a godsend. They're actually the best one that's out there was invented here by Dr. Martin Pomper, the Polarify, which came out 2 years ago with FDA approval. But that's most helpful in patients who have failed treatment, trying to find out where those residual cells are and see whether or not they can be treated with spot radiation rather than systemic treatment. SMA is expressed in aggressive cancers, in advanced cancers. I think you tried to look at it for early diagnosis, and what did you find?
It doesn't seem to be as helpful for those lower grade cancers because the difference in expression is likely not high enough to show a differentiation, say in Gleason 7 cancer or grade group 2. So certainly it's much more helpful for the aggressive form of prostate cancer. And for those who are logged in, this is a PET scan where you inject a tracer that binds to prostate cancer is the thought, and then it lights up. So it's a PET scan specific for prostate cancer. But to give you a glimpse of the future, we're actually in the middle of a clinical trial where we have a PSMA agent where we injected the day before in patients undergoing radical prostatectomy who have aggressive cancer, Gleason 8s, 9s. And then during surgery, we turn on an infrared camera. And the idea is that the PSMA is attached to a fluorescent agent that lights up during surgery. And so the next generation of surgical treatment we hope and expect that it'll be a digital kind of surgery that harnesses what we've learned scientifically, like this PSMA. So would a computer during surgery tell us cut here, don't cut there, based on this information? So I think there's a lot of exciting avenues that we're on the forefront here at the Brady that we think are going to pay dividends to help patients in the future. Maybe time for one more question here as we hit the top of the hour. And let me see. Dr. Walsh, a quick question maybe. Has there been research or thoughts that men who have a history of STDs, gonorrhea, et cetera, in their younger years have a higher risk of developing prostate cancer later in life?
That's been looked at very carefully, and actually Elizabeth Platts from our School of Hygiene looked at it, and there is no evidence that prior STDs, including chlamydia and others, increase the risk for prostate cancer.
And then one last one. I'm wondering, what is an acceptable PSA for my 55-year-old brother? I was diagnosed with prostate cancer at age 48 and had a prostatectomy, and our father is currently being treated for prostate cancer as well as his two brothers. What is the threshold for a 55-year-old man, and is the threshold different in someone with a family history?
The PSA is prostate specific, and one of the major causes for an elevated PSA is benign enlargement. And so there's no good answer to that. One way for him to find out which one would be better would be to use PSA and free PSA and the prostate health index, and at some point have his prostate size estimated. If he has a prostate size of 30 cc's, his PSA should be no higher than 4.5. And so certainly a PSA of 4.5 would be considered high in a patient his age, but he might have an 80 cc prostate, or that would be particularly, where that would be acceptable.
So unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. We're at the top of the hour. So we're sadly running out of time, and unfortunately, we'll not be able to answer a lot of good questions. And maybe we could figure out a format to relay the answers back. So let me end with a truly heartfelt thank you for Dr. Walsh for leading our session today, and Mr. Clay King for his willingness to share his story and join us today. And thank you to all of our attendees for joining us today. Your philanthropic support and other support helps us to deliver the promise of medicine and improve the health of our community and the world. If you'd like to learn more about how philanthropy helps to advance our hereditary prostate cancer research, I encourage you to reach out to our development team. Their contact information can be found on the closing slide, and we also have a QR code. Reminder, this was recorded and can be accessed by you and shared. And I thank you all for joining us today, and I hope that everybody has a wonderful evening. Thank you.